Welcome to my YouTube channel, Harable Coder, and in this session I'm going to discuss about the basics of Maven, because Maven is one of the most important build tools which we use while building Java projects for professional development or enterprise software development. So Maven is one of the most common build tools. Apart from Maven, we also have Gradle and we also had Ant, but I'm going to discuss in this video about Maven, which is very widely used, and hence it is important to understand the various concepts of Maven even for the starting Java programmers. So it's a build tool for the Java-based project. Important thing to understand is Maven enforces a very specific folder structure when Maven creates a project. And we cannot delete anything from that folder structure. We cannot alter that folder structure, because for Maven, that folder structure is very important to actually understand where we have kept the source files, where we have kept the test Java files, or where we have kept the resources, which are the properties or the XML files. So that is why for Maven, it is important to retain the folder structure which Maven creates. So what Maven does when we are trying to build a project, say for example with some external dependencies, is Maven actually downloads those external dependencies from a central Maven repository and copies it to my local system so that it can actually use those libraries to build my project, to build the project which I'm trying to build. Now, before I proceed, I just want to remind you two things. One is I also have another video on how to use external libraries in Java, where I have also touched upon Maven, and the link is over there. So please click that link to also view that, and maybe then you can come back. And also I have a blog post. The link of that is below on this topic, on the details of Maven. So maybe you can go through the blog post, give it a read, and then come back to this video and watch the demo, which might be more beneficial. Okay, so the first thing is we create a Maven project using this Maven archetype generate command and giving a group ID and artifact ID. Group ID and artifact ID are like, artifact ID is indeed the project name. So Maven will create a folder by the name of the artifact ID which you have created, which you have given, and the group ID is basically what you can say is the package name for that project. So once Maven generates the project, it creates a folder structure like this, which I have shown below. Like under the folder My App 1, it creates a SRC folder, and under SRC there would be a main folder and a test folder. So your Java classes will actually reside under the Java folder of main, and your test classes will reside under the test folder, and any properties or XML file will go under resources. So this is a very strict directory structure. We cannot alter this directory structure, else Maven will not function properly. So that's very important for you to keep in mind. And of course, there is this Maven pom.xml, which is kind of the backbone or the heart of Maven. It lists all the dependencies, all the plugins which Maven uses. We will see that in the next slide. So here is the Maven pom.xml. At a very high level, I do not want to go into a lot of details. You can see that the group ID and the artifact ID are mentioned here. Group ID is nothing but the package which I provided while creating the Maven project, and artifact ID is the name of the Maven project. And there is a dependencies section. Under that, I can actually list all the dependencies which Maven will download from a central repository and keep it in local for the purpose of my project, for basically compiling my project. And I can also declare multiple properties. And how do we actually compile the Maven project? So once we create the skeleton using the Maven archetype generate command, the next thing that we might want to do is we add the code, and then we want to compile the project. So we can use the command Maven compile space test-compile to compile the source under Java as well as the source under test, if we have written any source under test. And what I have also shown here is a local repository. So that is a setting which is there in the Maven settings.xml file. So when you have downloaded Maven, within the conf folder of Maven, there is a settings.xml file, and we often open that settings.xml file, and there is a local repository tag, and we edit that to actually give the location of a folder in our local system, so that there is a local repository created. If you do not override this, then by default it creates a local repository under the folder .m2 and under the user of the under the logged in user. So my advice is, it's better to actually override that, so that you know where exactly your local repository is created, because that local repository is the root folder where all the dependencies are downloaded and kept. And also when this project will be built, then also this project, if you want to install the project, it will also be installed to that same local repository. So that is why that local repository setting in Maven settings XML is really important. Again, all these things I have also detailed out in my blog post. So if you are comfortable reading, give it a read, and then you can come back and view this demo. Now, if you want to test, if you want to run the test file in the test project, in the test folder, then you can execute the command maven test. I also have a video of how to run JUnit tests in a Maven project, and I have given that video link over there, so please view that video. And if I want to package the project, what does packaging mean? Packaging means Maven will create a jar file of the project. So it will take all the compiled output, it will take the compiled classes, and it will create a jar file from the classes. So that is what is meant by packaging. And when you run the command maven package, it will create that jar file. And if you run the command maven install, then it will actually install that jar with the under the package structure in the local repository. I will show everything of this in the demo, so that should be very clear to you. Then there is a maven deploy command. In maven deploy, what we normally do is we actually deploy the jar which we created to some remote repository, because once it is deployed to some remote repository, then only it can be again reused by somebody else, just like we are using some dependencies created by some third parties. So that is why we can also create some utilities, and we can actually upload them in some Maven repository, and then somebody else should be able to find it out and use it. Maven repositories are normally created using two softwares, using either of the two softwares. One is the Nexus, the other is JFrog's Artifactory. So you need to use one of those softwares to actually create a Maven repository. And what are the jar files? We have seen that in the Maven package command, or the output of the Maven package command is a jar file. The jar file basically contains a list of all the classes with their folder structure, and that is basically a deliverable, or that is basically a package created from a Java project. So normally whenever we want to distribute our Java project with other persons, normally what we actually provide is a jar file. So jar is basically a zip kind of file which contains a lot of related classes which we can distribute to another person who can reuse our classes. So whenever we are downloading from Maven repositories, we are actually downloading some jar files. Now, the jar files may or may not be executable. And when will they be executable? Only when there is at least one class in the jar file which has the main method. Otherwise, it cannot be executable, right? A Java program cannot be executable if it does not have a main method. So if I have a jar file which does not contain any main method, which does not contain any class which has a main method, then of course the jar file will not be reused, will not be runnable. So in order to make the jar file runnable or executable, we have to have at least one class which a main method, and then there has to be a file known as manifest.mf in the jar file, which needs to list that class as the main class. Then we can run the jar file using the command java -jar and then the name of the jar file. And this is how normally in today's world we run a Java program. The advantage of running this jar file is, instead of running a single class, it will actually be able to run that class, and any dependency of the class which it needs, everything is available within that jar file. So this is a Maven project which I had already created. I'm not showing once again how to create the Maven project, because that is something which I have already covered in my other video where I talked about how to use external libraries in Java. Now, with the Maven project created, I will now first go ahead and compile the project, compile and test compile, because then it will compile both the source as well as the tests. So it has compiled, and you can see that a target folder is created, where within the classes folder you can see all the compiled classes are there, and within the test classes you can see the test class also has been compiled and created there, but the jar file has not yet been created. Now the next step is I would run the test class, and that I can run using the command maven test. So then it will run the test class, which is the app test. So it has run the test class, which is app test. Without any failure, it has run the test class. Now I will execute the command maven package. It will create the jar file here. See, the jar file has now been created. The name of the jar file is the name of the application, which is this, followed by the version, because this is the version that I have given. And finally, if I go ahead and install it, it will install it in my local repository. So if I do a maven install, it will install it in my local repository. And where it has installed, it has also written, so that is my local repository. My local repository is here, personal maven repo. So I will go to that folder. So here is my local repository, personal maven repo. And how I have specified that, because if I go to my maven settings.xml file, which I mentioned to you, so if you open that settings XML file, in that settings XML file it is specified that the local repository location is this personal maven repo is the location of the local repository, where all the dependencies and the created packages both will be there. The dependencies will be downloaded there, and the created packages will be copied over to there. The folder is personal maven repo, and in this folder, under org experiments, because that is the package name that I gave, under org experiments, see, this snapshot jar has been copied in the local repository. So thank you for your patient listening. I hope it was useful, but my suggestion again is to go through the blog post, read it out, and also to view my other video on how to use external libraries in Java, and then copy the code and then copy the commands and run them, create a local Maven repository, and see if basically change the location of the Maven repository in your Maven settings XML file, and see if the files are downloaded, if the dependencies are downloaded there, and the created package is also copied there. So do all these experiments and then be satisfied with that. All the best. And if you like this video and explanation, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and this video, and like my video, because that would motivate me. Thank you again.